as Jordan said, I am the Director of Developer Relations at a company called Camunda. We are a process automation company, helping people around the world build processes more easily, automate processes more easily, and in general, help their work be more effective and more productive and help them communicate across teams as well. But today, I'm here to talk to you about the goal of developer relations. And this is a very popular topic, as I'm sure many of you know. But the problem is, if you ask people in developer relations, hey, what's the goal of developer relations? If you ask 10 people, you'll get 12 answers. There's a lot of ambiguity around it. There's a lot of confusion around it. And more often than not, the answer that you're going to hear is, well, that depends, which will usually wind up with you looking something like this at the end of all of the conversations and still being super confused about how to prove the value of what you're doing and what the main goal is that you should be tackling. So I wanted to walk through some of the kind of common answers that people get to establish a little bit of the wrong answers only for developer relations. The first one that you'll probably hear is vanity metrics. So things like social media statistics, Twitter followers, or GitHub stars, number of downloads of your product or your open source program. And these things are wrong answers only, mainly because it doesn't tell you anything about the engagement. Getting the number of downloads for your platform doesn't tell you whether or not people are actually using it. It doesn't tell you how their experience was. It doesn't tell you whether they were able to be successful with what they set out to do. It just tells you that they downloaded it. With social media statistics, you can track how many people are following you on Twitter all day long, but unless people are actually engaging with you or clicking through on the links that people share, it's not going to give you any kind of information about who's following you and who's actually engaged with your platform. The second goal that usually winds up with people unhappy with the results is work output. So how much work is your team accomplishing? This could be the number of talks that's given in a particular quarter or the number of tutorials that are written. And as you'll see a little bit later, tracking these numbers isn't necessarily a bad thing. But when these are presented as the overarching goal of what your team will accomplish in a quarter, it doesn't tell anything about what the impact of your work will be, which is what the higher ups, your CEO, your CTO, the board, all of those people really care about at the end of the day. The last thing I'm going to touch on is filling gaps from other teams. And this is something that is rarely established as here's our number one goal, but it all too often tends to happen as companies try to figure out where does DevRel fit and what should they be focused on and how do we make a goal that makes sense with our current philosophy of what we're doing as a company. So you'll wind up filling gaps like technical support staff, right? Answering forum questions, troubleshooting things for customers, maybe events management and only events management. So handling sponsorships or social media management, which some of these things can fall partially into developer relations, right? Where there are times when we're responsible for the Twitter account, which is fine, so long as we're also responsible for talking to people and engaging with them on other platforms. It could be that, with forum questions, that's part of your job, but you're also pulling in engineers and other people from throughout the company. The problem is when this becomes truly the main focus of your day-to-day work, and it's not really showing the true value that we can provide to our coworkers as well as our community. So if those are the wrong answers, what is the goal of developer relations? And I'm unfortunately going to go back to say, you know what? It depends isn't that bad of an answer because it does. It depends on what your company is focused on. It depends on the stage of your company, the maturity of the company. But there is a question you can answer that will solve most of these problems for you. So when you're trying to figure out what is the goal of developer relations, you think about this. In order to successfully prove the value of our work in a way that the company understands and sees as beneficial, we need to attach the main goals of the developer relations department to the goals that are shared by the company as a whole. And that's a lot to take in. So let me break it down a little bit. The first thing is our goal, right? Our purpose that's going to keep us around at the company for longer, what's going to make sure that our jobs are secure and that people understand what we're doing, is we have to prove the value of our work. And how do we do that? Is there a specific way that we need to show that value so that it's actually helpful to us? There is. First of all, it has to be in a way that the company understands, right? It has to be something that people can relate to, which means it either needs to be something that is related to work that another team is doing, like I mentioned earlier with, helping to build out social media, helping to generate engagement on social media with the technical audience. But also, they have to see it as beneficial. And it's not just beneficial as in, hey, we've got a social media manager, check that box, someone's handling our social media accounts. But beneficial goes beyond that. It's not just, we sent 5 tweets yesterday, but we sent 5 tweets yesterday and got people responding and reacting and answering questions or giving us feedback or registering for an event. But at the end of the day, we're actually actively engaging with our community and hearing their voices on social media. It might be that it's beneficial because you're able to collect feedback, or it may be that you're able to spot patterns and trends throughout the tech industry as a result of engaging with developers on Twitter. But you need to do that in both a way that the company understands, again, so they might understand the value of you speaking at a conference, but then in a way that they see as beneficial, so that they aren't only seeing the dollar signs of either flying to that conference in a normal year, or the amount of time that it takes you to create that talk or really spend time building out that content. So those are the 2 things to really keep in mind as you're trying to figure out, how do I prove the value of my work? What does that look like? And then the third piece here is really making sure that your goals are also shared by the company goals. And so you can trace directly from your goals as a team back up to the impact that those goals have on the main company goals. And the reason why this is so important is because if you can point to, hey, we're working on awareness. And so we spoke at some conferences, which is that work output side of things. But because we were working on awareness, there were more signups. There were more people engaged with our sales team. Our sales team had more people to reach out to. Maybe it's, our developer experience improved because we went to hackathons to directly generate feedback from our users. Or we decided we were going to work really hard on our tutorials and getting started guides in order to make it so that people didn't leave, right? They actually downloaded and then also used the product at the end of the day, rather than getting halfway through and giving up because they weren't able to complete the getting started guide. So what does this actually mean? How do we actually put this into play? Because saying that, we need things that the company understands and sees as beneficial and tracing our direct goals back to the company as a whole, we want to make sure that we aren't getting involved in projects that really don't belong to us and that we shouldn't have ownership over, right? So this doesn't mean, if the company is looking for awareness, we're looking only at driving traffic to the website. If sales is a major goal, this doesn't mean that we're being looked at to generate more sales leads. It's not our responsibility. There are people whose jobs that is, and we can also pass sales leads off to people as we happen to come across them as we're engaging with the community, but that's not our primary role. Lastly, if we're just looking for more community members or to engage with more people throughout the industry, that's not our responsibility either. The work that we do can impact that, but we shouldn't be responsible for that end number of, we are now responsible for, this many people hitting our website per day, or this many sales per year, or this size of awareness throughout the world, right? So these are not the things that we need to be focusing on. So if that's not what we should be focusing on, what does it actually mean? This is the key question that I want us to focus on. How can we support our colleagues using our own unique talents to support their goals while still providing value to the community? And this is a very big question, right? Because it requires us to know what are our unique talents? What are the things that we bring to the table that we can point to and say, I'm capable of doing this, and no one else at the company is able to do that. And maybe that's, I'm able to gather feedback and then translate that feedback in a way that the engineering team understands or the product team understands. Maybe it's, I'm able to connect with community members one-on-one and really generate that relationship that's going to keep them coming back day after day, even if they do run into issues. Maybe it's the connections that we can make from the community back to the company. But there's always something unique about the way that developer relations teams engage with our communities that we can then use to support our coworkers' goals and the company goals while still providing that value back to the community at the end of the day and making sure that we're taking care of them. I want to talk a little bit about this model called Libby Boxes. And as Jordan mentioned, he's from Crunch. If you're familiar with Crunch, you know that they've talked about Libby Boxes a handful of times as well. It's this concept that's established by Cornell accounting professor, Robert Libby. And by using this model, we can draw a line directly from the company objectives all the way down to the specific work output we're working toward on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis. And this helps us really make sure that we're working toward common company goals while serving the community. It also gives senior leadership a way to see the direct impact that the DevRel team is having on the company goals, which again, going back to proving our value, proves that value internally, but also proves it externally, because while we're accomplishing that work that helps the company, we're doing things that are valuable for the community, which is a great symbiotic relationship. So let me explain a little bit about these Libby boxes. You can kind of see there's a lot of arrows, a lot of boxes on the screen. There are different pieces that we're aiming for here. And this top row of Libby boxes is really for the concepts or ideas. And once you kind of have these ideas fleshed out and identified, you're ready to think a little more tactically about how you can measure these concepts, what initiatives you might dive into, how you can kind of use these experiments to see whether or not they're going to be successful to drive that outcome. It gives us a way to break down our work into a few different areas here. So we've got inputs on that left-hand side and outcomes on the right-hand side, and then concepts, like I said, versus the actual tactics or initiatives. And this upper right box is the main goal you're trying to impact. You'll see I have company goal listed up there. The upper left box then is the general ideas or buckets of items that you think might have an impact on this goal. And we don't get into specifics here. We keep this super general, like create content or speak at conferences. This lower left box is where we start to explore the more tangible side of things. What are we going to do to actively track our success? What are we going to do to test these experiments? Not to define the success, you can see we do that in the lower right, but simply to track it and figure out whether or not these are areas we should pursue. Maybe we're going to check how many times other people, non-employees, external community members have presented about our product, or the amount of traffic that we're getting to developer-related content on the site and how engaged people are with that content. And then lastly, that bottom right box lets you establish the success metrics. This could be a number of new developers reached, or the number of attendees at a particular talk. What we primarily referred to earlier is vanity metrics. And where these come in handy here is that as you're sitting there saying, okay, I'm going to speak at this many events, or we're going to try speaking at conferences and then try tracking these areas, the bottom right box gives you an opportunity to say, yes, this tactic was successful, or no, it wasn't. And so that bottom right box is really where the work output and sometimes the vanity metrics belong. This gives you an opportunity to easily trace your work back to the company goals as a whole. And it also gives you the freedom to switch between tasks. So you can try out different experiments decide that one particular specific initiative or tactic isn't working like you hoped it would, and you can move on to a new task without having to clear it with your manager or the company stakeholders, because the tasks that you're doing are still contributing back to that overarching company goal. So you don't have to say to, your CTO or the head of your overall division that developer relations is included in, hey, we're going to speak at this many conferences this year. And then if you get halfway through the year and realize speaking engagements aren't as effective as we hoped they would be, change your entire tactic, your entire plan. You can say, look, we're trying to improve awareness of our products, which is the main company goal. One of the experiments we're going to try is speaking at conferences. That may or may not work. Another tactic we might try is publishing some tutorials or finding some interesting tools to integrate with. So you've got that freedom to decide this worked or this didn't. Let's try this new initiative. Additionally, if stakeholders come to you, if the CTO, the CEO, the board, upper management comes to you and says, hey, you have to do this particular task, right? You have to do this specific thing. This is a great way to figure out what goal those tasks might impact. Because there are going to be times when management shows up and says, this declaration, you have to attend 6 meetups per quarter or 6 meetups per month or whatever the requirement is. And more often than not, the team's reaction is going to be, I'm sorry, what? Why do I have to do that? What sense does that make? What are we trying to accomplish? And those are the questions you should be asking, because without a main goal that you're trying to achieve, attending 6 meetups per quarter is just attending meetups. You could show up, open the door, check the box that says, hey, I attended, pick up your name badge, and leave. It doesn't really matter because there's no objective telling you, hey, we want to attend meetups because we want to generate awareness, or we want to get feedback on our product, or we actually want to speak at those meetups, not just attend. And so we go back to our trusty Libby Boxes, because we now have our success metrics or the work output, and it's up to us to determine what goals these work outputs actually impact. And so instead of going right to left, top to bottom, we say, cool, we're starting in that bottom right. Let's now move back to the specific tactics. What does that tactic look like? Well, maybe it's attending more events to generate awareness. Maybe it's meeting more people in the community. Maybe it's finding more leads to pass back internally to our colleagues for content or recruiting. And then we can go back further to the experiment side and say, cool, an experiment we're going to try is attending more events in general, not just meetups, but attending more events. And then going back to the company goal of perhaps generating awareness or making your product more reliable through the feedback you're getting through customers. And so as you can see, it makes it easy to work either from the top down or from the bottom up. So my last question here is, why should I care? Which may or may not be a question that you're asking. But if you're not in charge of strategy or not responsible for your metrics, or upper management isn't asking you what you're doing and you don't have metrics that you have to report on, you may be asking me, does this actually matter? Is there a reason why you should be focusing on these types of strategic ways of connecting your team goals back to the company goal? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And let me explain why. If the company doesn't see the value of the work that we as a developer relations team is doing, if they don't understand it, if they don't see it as beneficial, then we're the first department to be let go. We're the first individuals to be let go. The community might be dissolved in and of itself, because the work that we're doing for the community trickles down to the community members themselves. And so if we're not proving the value that the community provides, the company may lose faith not only in our team, but also in the value of reaching out to that broader community to get feedback, to generate awareness, to increase the enablement of the developers that we're trying to serve. So this is a job for everybody, right? Not just management, because we really have to emphasize, we have to prove the value of our work in a way that they understand and see as beneficial by linking our goals back on up to the goals of the company as a whole. So who actually needs to know about these Libby boxes? Who needs to know which section, which box? There's a couple things, and it depends on what your role is at your company. If you're an individual who doesn't have strategic management or people management, then really at the end of the day, what you need to be doing is reporting the status of your work output to your manager. Because you reporting that work output helps your manager then say, I'm not exactly certain if this specific tactic is successful based on what you're telling me about the number of people we reached or the amount of feedback that we're getting from these particular community events. If you're a lead, whether that's a strategic lead or a project lead, you should be reporting both the work output and reports on those specific tactics, which ones are or aren't working, to your manager and possibly their manager, the skip level manager there, because that's going to help impact that experiments we can try, right? They'll be the ones to decide, you know what, we've tried that experiment enough, that one's not working, let's move on to the next one. And lastly, if you're a manager or a team lead, where you're the strategic manager or the people manager for the entire team, the specific tactics and how they're impacting the general experiments should be reported to your manager. And the results of those experiments as a whole and how they're impacting the company goal overall need to be reported back up to your manager, probably their manager, depending on how your org structure is, and possibly the senior leadership team and the board, depending on what your title is. So for me at Camunda, I'm the director of the developer relations team. My immediate manager is our CTO. His manager is the CEO. And so I report regularly on how our specific tactics are working, as well as what my assumption is on how we should change the experiments that we're trying as a result of that. So I bring proposals. I'm the responsible individual for that. I make sure that my manager understands why I'm making those changes or suggesting those changes, and then make sure that I'm reporting on how what we're working on is impacting the overarching company goal at the end of every quarter. Because again, it goes back to making sure that people are understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it, the benefits that it brings the community at the end of the day. So in summary, I've got a couple of things here. And if you're going to take a screenshot of any slide, this is a slide to do. So first up, attach your main goals to the goals that are shared by the company as a whole. Making sure that we can make that direct connection of the value that we're providing is an essential part of making sure that your team survives and can continue to provide value back to the community as well. Secondly, find ways to use your unique talents and the unique talents of your developer relations team to support the company goals while still providing value to the community. So making sure that you're doing things that only you can do, right? Not eliminating helping other teams from your day-to-day schedule completely, but making sure that the majority of what you're focusing on is your unique talents that can drive that value both for the company and the community. Third thing is implementing Libby Boxes to help define those experiments, those tactics, and the work output that you'll use to drive the company goals. And then lastly, remind others of your impact by having those regular conversations with management, which then proves that what you're doing is impacting the company as well as the community, which at the end of the day is really how we show our value. Thanks so much for having me. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Jordan, I can't hear you.
Here, okay. Here I am. Thank you so much for giving that talk. Very interesting. And especially your talk on Libby Boxes, which of course, we at Crunch is always, looking to, think of ways to, implement, because I think it really clarifies the, the whole goal, what you're doing, how it impacts ultimately the goal you set with the company. We've actually picked up just one question from the audience.
Okay.
Hang on. Okay, so this person, he wanted to know more. If he wanted to know more about the Libby boxes,
Sure.
where can you find extra resources? Could you recommend some places for him to look at?
That's a great question. So I need to publish a blog post about Libby Boxes.
Okay.
I have a note to myself to take this information from this talk and publish it, which I think will be helpful. Jordan, I know you at Crunch, you have some resources around Libby Boxes as well, so I would point them back to you. And then also, I mention it in my book. So I have a book called The Business Value of Developer Relations, and there's a better part of one chapter. The chapter is about metrics, and we spend a lot of time going through Libby boxes and how to do them. It gives some examples of what to look for and ways to create those Libby boxes. So if you actually go to persea-consulting.com/book, I can drop that link somewhere for folks. And there's a lot of links there and resources there for you to not only purchase the book, but also to look at some of the appendices, which have some of that further information too.
Fantastic. And what is your Twitter handle again?
Mary_Grace.
Fantastic.
So,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you, Mary. And just for your information, I've already read Mary's book, and it's really great. So please go and check it out if you haven't yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary.